research. So there are a couple that I address. I go into the research question. Sorry, that order is wrong. I go into the research question, provide my conceptual framework, provide the methods, findings, discussions, applications, speak a little bit about that, and kind of move forward in that way. So I wanted to open up as the intro, this quote that came from a paper that I was able to collaborate with Macy Golson at Michigan. And it says, now that we can see the children, we shall call them mathematicians, scientists, and scholars, their rightful names. And for me, that paper really focused on trying to illuminate the collective Black and how has math education been treating Black learners historically. So we did some work there, but I kind of opened here because I said one of the outcomes of that paper was this statement, but that I think it also is the foundation in which my research is in this presentation goes into. And so it's serving two purposes here. So there's not just one problem, there are many problems. So there we go. So problem one, I would say, is there are disproportionate suspension rates. So these numbers are just statistics comparing Black and white girls and boys. And when you look at the spectrum, I'm not sure if you can see, let me know if this is like a good size or not. When you think about Black girls in comparison to white girls, they're 4 times likely to be suspended, 4 times likely to be expelled, 5 times likely to be to transfer, 2 times likely, yes.
Can I do a quick tech thing? I think I'm hearing from the chat that people would like to switch the microphone to yours, okay. And then we'll, I don't know if we can mute this one.
So
if you...
Okay. Is that muted?
I'm muted here. Let's see what else.
I'm muted.
Is it still getting back noise? Yeah. Can we turn the sound down, maybe?
I'm on 0 sound.
Maybe if you
Say something.
Beautiful.
okay.
We're good.
Now, can they hear you?
If you go at home here.
Right. And then can I get a thumbs up? Oh,
Perfect. Yes. Okay.
Sweet. There it is. So problem number 1. Disproportionate suspension rates. So when we think about Black girls, they're 4 times as likely to be suspended as white girls, 4 times likely to be expelled, 5 times as likely to transfer, 2 times likely to be restrained, 3 times likely to be referred, 3 times likely to be arrested. And some of the statistics hold similar when you compare Black boys and white boys. So problem 1, there's a disproportionate suspension rates, right? In addition to that, coming from data from the Office of Civil Rights, we see that African-American students constitute roughly 17% of the student population, yet only about 10% are in gifted programs. If we think about Hispanic students, they constitute 22%, yet only 15% of students are receiving gifted services, right? So if you look at this as an example, this comes from a study looking at kindergarten, 1st grade, and 3rd grade, you can see the disproportionate number of Asian and white students who are actually proportionally being assigned to gifted programs. And notice the sign, because there's some subjectivity in that. It's not just you take a test, like there's some teacher, there's some power dynamics in there that allows for people to be in the gifted program. I don't have the stats for special education, but if you believe me that these stats kind of hold true across the nation, and that for minoritized learners, there's an overpopulation of students that's in special education and an underrepresentation of students that are in gifted programs. Problem 3 fundamentally is mathematics as a discipline. The book, I remember when I first read it, when it came out, Sarah Heidinger wrote a book, she's in women's studies back in 2016, Invented a Mathematician. She goes through the book and outlines the different ways that mathematics is white male Eurocentric dominated. She talks about in textbooks, how even girls are typically positioned as like needy, not having the answers, whereas boys are actually having the answer, creating these grand solutions and answers. She also talks about the pictures. So when you think about like philosophers in Europe, there's always like this nice, eloquent pose, but how women are often romanticized. So she goes into a lot of detail about how essentially the discipline of mathematics has included some and excluded others. But it's not just in the books, right? there's these movies, and don't get me wrong, I love these movies, right? We probably have seen them to varying degrees, and there are probably more that I could include. But the messages about what it means to be smart, who is smart, how we're being socialized, they come in these movies. When you think about A Beautiful Mind, great person, John Nash, amazing mathematician, borderline, kind of crazy, very much independent, right? You have Good Will Hunting, you have Gifted, where you have this little girl who's a genius, can do all this amazing things. Even in Hidden Figures, you have people just going to the board and just spitting out numbers like, this is what it means to do mathematics, right? These are the messages that we're constantly like seeing over time. And that happens outside of school. It happens in books, it happens in TV shows. And so what that does is condition us to think about mathematics as a very individualistic, innate, and elitist discipline. Problem 4, this isn't like new, right? Everything, nothing new under the sun. So when you think about the historical implications, this goes back way, way back. So I like the book Color of Mind, which in there, they kind of talk about the ideology that Black people are inferior to white people as it pertains to intellect, character, and conduct. And if you go back to IQ testing, you go back to slavery, there's been this constant narrative of messages around Black people being inferior to white people in a variety of ways. These books are just examples of some of those. You can even go back to thinking about measuring skulls as like representation to try to prove or explain why that is the case. And in the work of Ernest and Martin, they kind of talk about how these narratives have created this racial hierarchy of mathematics ability and intellect, meaning that Asians and whites are at the top, Native Americans, Blacks, Latinx are at the bottom. So these are 4 problems that I've just outlined, right? So what does this mean? I think everybody here could probably take some type of meaning from what I've just described as problems. When I think about it though, I interpret this as Black learners are unlikely to be seen or positioned as smart in mathematics. Just simply and fundamentally, that's what these problems have kind of outlined. But it's not to be so bleak, right? There's been amazing work that's been done. So these are some of the researchers that have been doing amazing work and pushing the work forward with attention to Black learners and attention to thinking about the different ways that identity, socialization, curriculum, all of the different mechanisms in mathematics education can be used to push forward and change and shift and disrupt the narrative around Black learners. But in addition to that, I'm still stuck on smartness, right? And so for me, I think about the intersection of smartness and mathematics in mathematics education. And so we know that there's a lot of other scholars that's doing great work in thinking about mathematical mindsets and really trying to broaden and open up what does it mean to be smart beyond the things that we know. That is the memorization, the speed, the correctness, the independence, those things. So some of that also includes complex instruction, thinking about newer tasks, thinking about assigning roles, assigning competence, the teacher leveraging their power in classrooms to be able to do the things that can actually level the playing field and encourage different types of smartness and competencies that's being recognized. So when you put these all together, you have the intersection of race, smartness, and mathematics education. So that's kind of like where I'm coming to, right? But some might say, okay, still, like, why smartness? And there was an amazing paper written, and I actually had a chance to meet Leonardo as well. And it says the authors in that particular paper, they argue that smartness is nothing but false and oppressive, and as such, attempts to theoretically re-articulate or rehabilitate smartness may serve to illuminate, but ultimately fail to dissolve the normative center of schooling, which leaves the question, can we reimagine smartness? Well, this is why you're here. And I would say, yes, we can. But in all seriousness, I love that paper. I thought it was a great paper. But for me, I think just abolishing the term doesn't get at the meat of what's going on. And so I kind of think about reimagining smartness as one, smartness is divisive and it's here to stay. I mean, the term is used all day, every day, whether we're talking math classrooms, whether we're talking sports, thinking about high IQ, like it's constantly like coming up. And so for me, I think about, well, what is the historical histories behind the term and how can we reimagine it in ways that can actually be productive? So with that, the way that I enter this conversation is I think about smartness, but despite there being a lot of work, one of the things that have been interesting to me, and you have the researchers doing the work, you have teachers, you have parents, but I'm very much interested in the children. And in the words of, I'm citing Howard 2000, where I think the title of that paper is called Telling Their Stories, where he focused on the students and their experiences with culturally responsive teachers. For me, I think about what are the stories of the Black learners and about how they think about smartness, because that's a space that we don't know as much about. So with that conceptual frame, So talking about smartness, what is smartness? I think smart is more of a verb and not a noun. It's something that you do, and we need to name those things. It's not something that's innate, it's not something that's static. It is something that we do. I think words like competence, intelligence, ability, I think they're all synonyms, in my opinion, at getting at the same thing. So that's at the center. Smartness, I have Black learners, but there's other, I think, very important frameworks and theories that I draw upon. Critical race theory being one. Race and racism, even if students don't name it explicitly, race is still going on. It's always in play. Racism is always existing. I think that's important to name because students may or may not actually communicate that explicitly. And other times they will. But and part of the other tenets of CRT that are particularly useful for us in thinking about is counter storytelling. So as I mentioned previously, there's a lot of narratives, a lot of storylines about smartness, who's smart, things of that nature. So being able to actually see what students are saying serves as the opportunity to provide a counter narrative to that. And then you have whiteness as property. As the Heidegger book kind of highlights, as I mentioned in the movies and the videos, that whiteness as property kind of always operates and comes into fruition in terms of like the actual things that we see and do. So when we think about the traditional ways of what it means to be smart, that is whiteness as in practice, essentially. But the thing that I really want to highlight as well is this idea of brilliance as axiomatic, meaning that brilliance does not need to be proven. And I want to pause and take a step there. So let's say that you quote unquote prove that Black children are brilliant. Well, you're in a lose-lose situation, right? So if you say quote unquote, I can prove that, that could just be one study. But the minute that you don't prove that, then it's, oh, they're not. So it's like, it's not really a helpful way to approach the problem. And so this idea of brilliance as axiomatic, it's not just something I say at the beginning, it's something that's embedded in the work. It's like in the design, in your research questions, what are you asking, how are you interpreting the data? Like it doesn't just come up here, it's all throughout. And so I just want to make that very clear when you're thinking about this conceptual framework and the theories. Mathematical education has contributed to outcomes of Black learners as relates to this idea of smartness and has offered different things. Growth mindset and grit are things to me that is super interesting. I think it was designed to do what it was intended. And I think that was to provide a theory to try to categorize things. I think what's very fascinating about growth mindset, and I would probably throw grit into that conversation as well, is it gave us the language to say intelligence is malleable. It's no longer, you can't say like it's static. You have this fixed and growth mindset, but it's not a static thing. For me, where it comes up short and why I think about smartness is that it doesn't provide the language of, well, what do you do? So yes, you can have a fixed mindset. Yes, you could not have grit or have grit, but what does that mean? How do we come to that? And when you just take that on its own, it can be problematic. Because if you think about it, let's say if a teacher said, oh, the student has a fixed mindset or the student has a growth mindset, well, your own biases, and we've seen this in the studies, kind of can play out, and in the work that scholars have done here, it can play out in the classroom in very problematic ways. And so when you think about this idea of growth mindset, I like it from the standpoint of the malleability of thinking about intelligence and smartness, but it does have some shortcomings. So for the methods, I just want to provide a little bit of the context. So this was a 10-day summer mathematics program. Students did instruction 2 hours per day, rising fifth graders, and really designed to broaden what it means to be smart. There's a lot of different opportunities in there, but I think that will be the premise. The demographics of the classroom was 28 fifth graders in total, 22 Black learners, 4 white learners, 2 Latinx learners. And again, just to give you more context around what was going on in the classroom, definitely collaboration-oriented mathematical tasks. So there was not hardly any tasks where students were working by themselves. They were designed to where you needed to work with others, which was very important. The content shifted both above and below grade level. Students had homework every day except for the weekends. And a subtle point, I think a very important point, is there were no grades or scores on assessments. So I think living in a world where everything has to be assessed and everything has to be quantified, I think it's fascinating thinking about this idea of smartness in the context where no one is essentially being graded. So here's the beautiful class shaped in a U. So from this point on, you're gonna see a lot of pictures. So I hope if there's some ahs and some, I totally would dig that. I would love it. I love it. So I'm gonna tell you about my 5 focal students who I love so much and have just been able to do this study have taught me a lot. I'll start with Ariana. So Ariana is very nice and sweet. Like the first time I met her interviewed, she's telling me like she's like, I do karate, like I mean, just kind of giving me like she was an open book. And she did a lot of great work. And what was fascinating to me about her is she was very diligent and persistent like in her work. So she described to me she had some experiences where students would laugh at her in classrooms, which I think that's why she chose not to share her thinking. And she even mentioned that I think maybe in the first interview that I had with her that she had a parent-teacher conference to address the issue. So she was always very interesting to think about because I always thought she had great ideas, but it seemed like maybe prior experiences could be playing a role in like how she was participating in the space. Chandler is like Miss Compliance. She's that student like 50 problems, I got you. Study, like I'm gonna work hard. Like she was absolutely, you know, amazing in that way. And I'm saying compliant, I can get back to that. We can have a conversation about that later. But just to give you an example of like how serious she was about her work. Like I think there was a point in the program where the teacher was having some issues trying to get students to like basically focus. And so she gave the students the opportunity to say like, well, what do you think we should do? And she was like, if you're not trying to learn, kick them out of class. And so that to me, that just embodies like her. And you will see in a moment, like with the different conceptions of smart that she had, like you can see how that very much could fit. Jeremiah, this was my guy in the sense of he was so hard to read. I mean, he was the guy or the kid that would say, you know, uh-huhs and head nods. So as a researcher, you're like, man, can you please say yes or no? He was that student, but I love Jeremiah, and he's going to be one of the focus students that I talk about today. And you're going to get a chance to see and learn much more about him. But Jeremiah was great. Kasim, he was that kid. Like everybody, and as I'm going through these kids, I hope you can imagine like either you were that kid or you seen kids like this. I hope I'm kind of painting that picture. He was definitely that kid. Like he told me like I was a top star. Every teacher said they wanted more of me. Like, like he was confident, like on 10. And just to give you like his personality. So I graduated from Morehouse College, the all Black male historically college in Atlanta, Georgia. Samuel Jackson, Martin Luther King Jr., all of those great, Bakari Shell, all the great individuals went. So there's a saying, that's at Morehouse where it says, you can tell the Morehouse man, but you can't tell him much. So, right. Shows you that institution. But what's funny is I wore the shirt when I was interviewing that said that. And I think it was actually like I had wore it a day, but I don't think it was actually the same day that I interviewed. And so we were talking and I was like, yeah, you know, are you learning from others? Like, what do you think about smartness? And he was like, well, in 4th grade, he was like, I was the smartest. Like, nobody couldn't tell me nothing. He was like, kind of like your shirt. Like, nobody couldn't tell me nothing. I was like, okay. But that was Kasim. Like, he was very observant and picked up and like would flip it really, really quickly. And then last but not least is Lorraine. And Lorraine is so interesting. I probably could just talk about her and write a paper about her. So she actually did not want to be in the program at all. And she says that. She was very blunt throughout, whether she was interviewing me or whether she was in the classroom. But she would do like amazing things. Like she knew, like she would be very attuned. Like she knew everyone's answer. She would speak up for others if they weren't speaking loud enough. Like she just did very interesting things. What's fascinating is when I asked her, did she think she was smart? She said no. And so what you find, I hope that I've articulated and kind of describing the students, they're all very different, that's what I really want. I wanted to get students, I observed them, looked at their surveys, which I'll get to a little bit in a second, just about the data I collected, but to really have these very ideas around smartness and what does it mean and look like. So yes.
When you said Lorena didn't want to be part of this, you mean part of 5 or
oh, great question. Now, she didn't even want to be in the room. She said she liked reading. So she was like, I don't do math. But yes, great question. For the data, we had pre and post surveys, which I created, and they were open-ended. So the questions were around things like describe experience when you thought you were smart, describe people you thought were smart, like, do you think you're smart? What does it mean to be smart? They were just like those very open-ended general kind of questions, and kind of like a similar structure for the post surveys, but the post surveys are more designed to kind of capture more of like the mathematics program. So similar questions, but a little bit more specific. And then there were semi-structured interviews. For the most part, everybody got asked the same questions, but as time evolved, there would be particular things that happened in the class that I would attend to. And then the notebooks are golden. In the notebooks, which they used every day and wrote in every day, they had warm-up problems. They had the interclass checks. They had things called note to self, which was the opportunity for them to sit down and reflect upon whatever was going on in the classroom. So just like a lot of rich data there for sure. So for the data analysis, use a grounded theory approach. I really wanted to let the data speak and give them my idea around smartness and really trying to attend to Black learners. That made probably the most sense. I coded artifacts in the following order. I did interviews first, then I went to the notebooks, then I went to the pre and post surveys. And I thought in this order, and I did multiple cycles of that, I thought that order was very interesting and would allow me to be able to pick up on things that happen at different places and to kind of begin to like triangulate. And I thought the interviews were like the richest, and then the notebooks were next, and then the pre and post surveys were. So those were like kind of like my thinking behind why I went in that particular way. I used in vivo, which was really cool in the sense of it allowed me to run several different types of queries. And in the process of doing that, I could just see different patterns. I was able to develop cases, which allowed me to run different crosstabs and things of that nature. So let's hop into the findings. So again, the question that's driving this is, how do Black learners describe what it means to be smart in math class? So I am smart when I. So these are the conceptions that the students had, and I break them down each one. Again, I'm going to focus on Lorraine and Jeremiah in this case, but I can take questions or anything about any other students and some of the stuff that that's going to come up later. So for Ariana, she thought about smartness as knowing a lot of math, trying her best and working hard, and taking her time on task. That was something that kind of came up a lot for her, and she loved working with her seatmate, Helen. For Chandler, who I said it was very compliant, she also had know a lot of math, study and work hard, participate in class, revise thinking, and help and receive help from others. For Lorraine, it was get correct answers and keep trying. It was straight to the point. For Jeremiah, he just had one really, and it was no math. And I said, I'm gonna get to Jeremiah in a second. He's a character. And then for Kasim, it was get correct answers, share ideas publicly. And so because I'm gonna focus on Lorraine and Jeremiah, I just said a little bit about the other three, just really quickly. Kasim is interesting in the sense of going to the board and sharing his ideas was like, that was his thing to say, like, I know I'm smart. And like, I think I even asked him one time about like smartness. He was like, I'm smart. I made it to campus. Like, and he would say things like, I go to the board like 30 times. Like for him, he's like, I'm a role model. Like that is how I exude, or that's how I enact my smartness. For Ariana, like I said, it came up in much more like subtle ways. And I think some of that had to do with her prior experiences. So she did amazing and great work. All of them did, but hers was more like the subtlety of, I'm gonna do my best, right? I'm gonna try hard. I can take my time on task. Like these things that are very much like I can control, they're not external, they're more internal. And then Chen, like I said, she was compliant, but she had a lot of different things. And I would argue that the different conceptions that she had allowed her to move and shape in different spaces, which I think becomes really important. And again, some of these are very much like internal, not necessarily external. So I'll dive into Lorraine. Love this picture of Lorraine. So before I even show you transcript and recordings, things of that nature, this was the problem that they were given. So I give you a second just to look at the problem. I mean, we're math education. I figured we throw some math in here. You know, it's lunchtime. Snack on some math. I won't give any answers. You know, I can tell everybody's real focused. Like, I'm gonna solve this problem. He got math up here. I got this. So I'm not gonna spoil it for you. I'm gonna let y'all do it. Look, I'm gonna let y'all do y'all. You know. So let's go to the actual transcript. So I'm gonna pull up the transcript first, but I'm gonna play this video or the sound, and hopefully you can hear. If not, raise your hand, use the reaction, hop in the chat, and we'll be able to fix it. So fingers crossed. Actually, you know what? Yep. Let me go back because I know that I didn't do this when I shared before. So let me share sound. There we go. So now we should be in business. If not, charge it to my head and not my heart. Okay.
Not really.
Why not?
Because sometimes when they did the triangle problem, I thought it was confusing. Because when it was frustrating me, because I had to put the numbers in order or whatever, or I had to put them in a triangle, and it was confusing because it was shaped like a triangle. And I'm used to numbers just being straight or like that, or just normal. I can't do stuff like that. It's confusing.
Okay. In general, do you think you're smart in math class, like outside of like being here?
I don't really do math outside of here.
What about like
Except for homework.
Okay. What about like in your fourth grade class? Do you think you are smart there, math class? Okay. So why do you think you're smart there?
Because it was easy.
Oh, okay. So then you don't think you're smart here because why?
The math is harder.
Math is harder. So do you typically like get the problems quickly here? Or
No.
you gonna- Okay.
Not all the time.
Not all the time. How does it make you feel?
Frustrated sometimes. Sometimes I just do good.
Okay. In your fourth grade class, do you have this feeling a lot? Like were you frustrated with problems?
No, not all the time.
Okay.
It was interesting to me here, and again, going back to her conceptions being getting correct answers, and I'm focusing on that one in particular because the other one will come up in a second. It's like this idea of like easy and hard. So it's all centered around like, am I getting right answers? But it's like she's already picked up on like it's levels to this, right? Like if the math is easy, at least what she said here, like in her case, it was, oh, I'm smart. But now that we're in a different case, it's taking me longer to do the problems. I'm not answering them correctly. Like, nah, I'm not smart here. So it's very subtle, but it's like, that's a very like nuanced way to pick up on very quickly. Like, oh, when I'm thinking about smartness, it's in relation to the mathematical content that I'm doing. So again, this is another problem. This is the square problem. Give you a little bit to look at. It seems very easy. Actually, it is, but there is a subtle mistake that you could make. This, I'm just throwing that out there for the people that want to do the math. So the columns, the diagonals, everything's supposed to equal 15. You can only use one digit once. So I'll pull it up. I'll say Lorraine actually did this problem and presented it at the board. That's some context. So this is me again. If you can't hear the sound, I didn't see any chat or anything. So I'm assuming it was okay, but at the very least you have the transcript. Before I play that though, I want to talk about the train problem. The train problem was probably like the pinnacle problem in the summer mathematics program. It took them literally the entire time to do. It's a traditional like combinatorics problem with basically 125 combinations that you have to try. But again, we're talking about fifth graders thinking about trying 125 combinations. So it's split into two parts. The first part is a little bit easier in the sense of you're just getting familiar with what types of numbers you can build. So each train holds a certain number of passengers. And so they're trying to develop and figure out like, oh, can I make a train that can hold basically 1 through 15? But there's certain conditions that they have to meet. So some of those conditions, like you can only use one train once, right? But in this case, order doesn't matter for part one. It's just, can you make a train that can make numbers 1 through 15? Now for part two, it gets a little bit more turned up, to say the least, because now order matters. So for example, if I had a train like white, red, green, as you kind of see on the screen, that can make 6. But when you want to be able to disentangle the train such that you can make all the numbers 1 through 15, the problem with that is when you can't rearrange the trains. And so what you end up finding out is that there's no solution to this problem given the constraints of the problem. But again, these are fifth graders now solving a problem that has no solution, just to give you context.
When do you feel smart in math? gives two examples. Train problem, square.
Okay, what about the train problem and the square problem make you feel smart?
Easy.
They're easy?
Yes.
So if a problem is easy, that makes you feel smart?
Well, I mean, the train problem's not that easy. But the square problem is.
Okay. The square problem is easy. What makes you feel smart when you do the train problem?
Because it's hard. Sometimes I can answer it, and sometimes I can't.
Wait a minute, repeat that, what you said.
I said because sometimes I can answer it, and sometimes I can't.
What do you mean? Sometimes you can answer, sometimes you can't.
Because we're doing it over and over again.
Okay. And then what's the last question? The blessing and the curse of combinatorics problems. But if you notice here, now it's like smartness. I'm smart. I'm trying hard. Like I'm persevering. Like the language kind of shifted from the first interview to the next interview. So you see both of these conceptions now. You've seen it in the other example, and then you've seen it in the second example. So I'll go to Jeremiah, and I come back and kind of like wrap it up. Again, like I said, Jeremiah is a character. He's pretty funny. You'll see like in some of these clips, just like who he is and his demeanor. So here, this is an end of class check on the right. And so if you just kind of look through here, this was his answers. He got all the answers right. I just want to throw that out there. But notice on the first one, he crossed out and said IDK, but then wrote 2 fourths and then said he guessed. But also look that he said it's too hard and scratched that off too. But then the other problems he got right and was clear. So for me, and you'll notice in both of these like transcripts, I'm doing probing, but I had to say, like, I'm not trying to get him to tell me, like, to prove to me that he's smart. I'm really trying to figure out, like, what is he using as like a barometer to figure out to say, like, I'm smart because of X, Y, and Z. So if I'm probing a little hard, I wasn't trying to like prove. It was more like just trying to get him to communicate to me what was he thinking about smartness. Okay. At the bottom, you said you think you did everything smart. Can you like explain what you were trying to say?
I know I'm smart. And I could do anything smart.
But on this page, when you said it, you said everything today. So what were things up here that you think you did were smart?
Everything.
Give me an example.
Well, I know everything.
You know.
That's what I meant.
You knew everything?
Yep.
You said you guessed that answer though. Did you know that answer?
No.
Nope. See why I like Jeremiah? He's funny. So then going to the next example, again, his was really like know a lot of math. And you're kind of like seeing like, this is me. Like I know my math, like I'm good. So again, this is another in the class check. And then this one, I'm trying to see, hopefully y'all can read this handwriting. I will say doing this, I'm telling you, pick up on kids' handwriting. You're like, man, how did I read that? So in here, he said he feels smart when he get answers right. And then he also says he feels smart when he do good, essentially. And so this is just kind of probing and trying to pick up on some of the things that he's saying in this in the class check. And one of the in the class checks, you said you feel smart when you get the right answers and when you do good. What does it mean to do good? Particularly we're talking about in math class.
To get the right answers and like do good work.
Do you think that right answers and good work are the only ways that show that you are smart?
No.
What are some other things you think show that you're smart?
You could get wrong answer, but you still could be smart.
Okay. Any other things that you think you could do and still show that you're smart?
Not in my head right now.
Okay. So this is interesting to me, and I'm gonna get back to it in a second, but he's already picking up on like, man, I can get wrong answers, but I'm still that guy. I'm still smart. Like, and I just found that to be very interesting with him, and you'll see it in a second. So we've covered both Lorraine and Jeremiah. And so now I kind of want to take a step back. So you get a feel for like, what are these conceptions like? What do they mean? What does it mean for particular students? So there's three things that kind of emerge, and the overarching being like, as you probably see now, there's complexity in these conceptions of smartness. Like, it's not just like right and wrong, like they're deep, and I think in very important ways that I think that we definitely could attend to. And so with that, there's three things that I can highlight again. And after this, you can ask me any questions about any of them. I'm gonna focus on the conceptions of coping strategies, but the superficial similarities, substantive differences is super interesting. So on face value, you probably saw on that chart previously that there were some similarities across students, but just because they had quote unquote the same conceptions don't mean that they were enacted the same way or they look the same. The conception of coping strategies, like I said, I'm gonna get to in a second. And you probably even notice in some of the video and some of the transcript and some of the audio that I shared, you start to see like these conceptions are like shifting a little bit, or at least they're picking up on things that when I showed you the first time wasn't there when I talked to them the second time. So when I say conceptions as coping strategies, essentially what I'm saying is conceptions are connected to experiences in general and their prior experiences in math classrooms. And those are in play in helping them to be able to feel comfortable or have comfort in math classrooms. So how they act, how they're moving is connected to these prior experiences. And as you kind of see in some of the questions, like they're talking about in the space, but they're also talking about outside of the space and before they got into the space. So essentially everyone for this particular theme, 4 of the 5 students had what I would call this idea of conceptions as coping strategies. I'm gonna focus on Lorraine and Jeremiah and just kind of provide like a little bit more detail about them. And then I go to the implications. So essentially for Lorraine, like I said, she's very interesting because even on the first day of like class, she went up to the board. If I showed you a clip, you just wouldn't think like she was a student that wouldn't think she was smart, right? Like she just exuded it. She would constantly, like I said, talk out, things of that nature, had great answers, had great ideas. Like she was very much engaged. And so her conceptions were getting right answers and basically keep trying. Like those were the 2. And in some ways, I think those allowed her to basically cope and be herself in that space. And even when she was when we had the interviews and looking at the data, she would constantly mention like, yeah, my previous teacher, she used to yell at me. She would scream at me. She would say things like, I know I'm getting smarter because of the teacher in this space. So it was interesting to see her like be very engaged like in this space, but I'm hearing like the noise or some of the other stuff that she was describing like in other spaces. And so this idea for me of coping strategy, especially when we tie into what we said earlier about how Black girls in particular are constantly getting in trouble for subjective infractions. And when I tell you like she's constantly blurting out things like that and not getting in trouble, it seemed like she was using her conception and trying to make sense of this space to be able to be herself. And because I could imagine a lot of times with some of the stuff that she was doing in this space, she probably would have got in trouble for. So that's what I mean when I say like this idea of these conceptions serving as coping strategies for her. But Jeremiah, like, I'm telling you, he was funny. And I'm not gonna lie, when you just read him at face value, you might be like, man, he's just like a know-it-all. But when you think about the backdrop of everything I said prior to, and even some of the snippets that you just saw here, you could kind of see like those was his way internally of being able to be like, I'm smart regardless of whatever, right? And I think that was coming through the more that I looked at the data and the more that I'm thinking about, like I said, remember I said earlier, I'm like, you think about brilliance as axiomatic, that is not just like, I'm just dropping that up there. Like that's living all throughout in terms of the analysis, the interpretation. And when I think about him, I think about Black boys and his experiences and what he was saying, because he was saying things like, nobody is as smart as me. I don't learn from anybody. But I think those were his way of, again, trying to cope with his conceptions and also trying to be in math classrooms. So to me, that's just very fascinating about him. And I have a picture here of him, super funny. One more thing I say about him, and I would try to catch him too. So one of the things that happened in the class is very often they would be asked like, who did you learn from today? Things like that. And of course he said always, he didn't learn from anybody. And so one day I asked him, I was like, did you learn, did you learn statement such and such? And he was like, no. I'm like, but did you do that? Cause I'm in there, so I know what's happening in the class. And he's like, Nope. And then he switched it up and he was like, I could have done that. I'm like, I'm done. I'm done with you. So when you combine all of this study and this work, like what does this mean? What are the implications, right? And there's a couple things that definitely resonate, stick out to me. One is the heterogeneity among Black learners. And I'm thinking about, there's a paper by Carlo Connor Lewis. I can't think of the third author, my apologies. But they kind of talk about how does one study and how can we nuance like Blackness and race and kind of really go in and do a deep dive of what that could look like. And here, I hope as you've seen, there's a lot of differences among these Black learners. Black learners are not monolithic. Their concept of smartness is very, very like complex and very nuanced in ways that, you know, I think we could definitely have more consideration for. For me, the methodology or methodological considerations are interesting because as I've just shared with you here, like just thinking about language and how we collect and analyze data. I mean, building a rapport with students, how am I picking up? Like, what does it mean to do good? Like, what is this easy, hard? Like, it's not, if you just go into it like face value, you could lose a lot of things. And so it just has me thinking about, you know, as a field, how do we continue to improve, you know, the data collected and analyzed, particularly with respect to language. And the other piece of it, you're seeing like the fluidity of what they're talking about and how it's shifting. And so how do we have methods, maybe both qualitative and quantitative, to capture some of this very like dynamicism that's going on with these learners? The other piece is, and I specifically worded this way to not put the onus on the student, but it's like, under what circumstances can conceptions develop or shift? I'm not going to put it all on the learners, but I'm not going to say the space caused anything, but I do think there's something to be said about these conceptions as being developed and that we can have a better understanding of what that means and look like in the environments that we're in, particularly with the classrooms. And then overall, I think just valuing other ways that students identify as smart that are important. I think we see it here. There's some traditional notions in there that you saw, like the getting the right answers and things of that nature, but you also have some very non-traditional things too. And I think one of the big premises around, I think, the value of studying like a group without a reference group in particular is being able to really see what are some of these other important, valuable things that people are bringing to the work. So with that, I go back to the quote. And that's, now that we can see the children, we shall call them mathematicians, scientists, and scholars their rightful names. But that see in that quote is very important. We have to see. You have to see these conceptions like and how they're playing out in order to be able to name. And I hope what this presentation and what this work can continue to do is really allow us to illuminate some of the ways that Black learners are thinking about smartness, and that can have impact for teaching practice. So with that, thank you. And I will take any questions, comments, concerns. I was young in that picture, or younger. The chat, you can unmute. Like I said, I like it all. Well, let's go to lunch now.
So I'm curious about the, I'm not sure if everyone can hear me, but I'm curious about what you learned about the students, the focal students' experience in math. Like they contrasted this and their regular class, right? So in my regular class, I know all the answers, and then here I don't. So I guess I'm just wondering about what you knew about their experience in regular math class before this experience, or how that factored into thinking about your focal students.
Great question. And as you were talking, what I realized too, this is the blessing curse of research. Originally, what I really wanted to do, and I think this is the implication of the work as well, is I wanted to follow the students, like prior, during that program, and after. Because I think there's something to be said about studying students across contexts, right? And so I didn't get to see them before or after. I just saw them in that space. And so the things that I picked up on that I got was solely like what they were saying based upon what they recall. So that's the extent to which I was able to get their prior experiences, if that makes sense. Oh, I'm the moderator. I'm the moderator. Go for it.
So I have heard the term focal student like before, but I don't think I totally know what it means.
Yeah. Yeah, nah, great question. So for me, when I say focal student, these are just the primary students that I want to look at for the given purpose of the phenomenon I want to study. And so because I was thinking about Black learners and smartness, and I wanted a wide range, I just wanted to focus on these 5 out of the total of 28 or so. And it was a combination of, like I said, the pre and post survey, some observing, to try to get a feel for like who might be like a good group that could provide like a lot of detail. Funny story, Chandler, I asked her like to interview and she was like, no. Like, you gotta love kids. But I was fortunate too. I was able to have like a partner in crime too. And she eventually she clearly started doing the interviews, but it's just also like another fun example, like with kids, like certain days, like, nah, I want to see you today. But what was funny was when I started pulling them, then the rest of the kids like, can you pull me? Can you pull me? And I was like, I'm sorry. No, great question though. Was it 2 hands? Oh. Go ahead. Yeah, I was about to say, I just remember like, wait, it was 2 hands unless you did that button.
I have a question, but I'll wait.
Sure. Thanks. So I love to see your connections with the kids. I think that's amazing.
Thank you.
But my question is sort of, I'm really interested in the way you define smartness. I think you did something very smart there, insofar that like you define this as sort of the situated, practice-based contextual concept, which that's not how I think about smartness in everyday life. And I suspect that's not how most people think about it, right?
Yeah.
I'm smart in math in the trains task, for instance.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, I don't know if you ask questions sort of outside of that lens, or to what extent you think, EML is a super unique space.
Yeah.
And even the way you're conceiving of smartness, I would say is kind of unique. To what extent do you think that's actually impacting the students, like how they respond, or even like, did you see evidence that their conceptions were evolving perhaps over time as a result of being in this space, reflecting in this way, talking to you, that kind of trajectory? Because I could imagine you could actually shift things through your methodology.
Yeah, like so I will, it's tough because I'm constantly, because I don't want to like make particular kind of claims about that particular space because I wasn't studying that space. I did choose that space for a particular reason because I knew that space was different, but it wasn't like necessarily like I'm validating and say like this space was doing that. That being said, I do think that space was interesting because it was different. And I can say that because I kind of know the context and where the students were coming from and things like that. So I have a little bit of more backdrop to say what they were experiencing there was probably very much different than what they were getting in their own like classrooms, right? And so to that extent, to me, when I'm thinking about the shift, so there was a thing where I say like, there's some malleability. I think Lorraine was a case in that. Kasim was also a case in that, in my opinion, where for him, I saw it at least in 2 ways. One, he just started to describe like learning from others and saying things like, I can learn from others. And then it also came up because he was very much a speed correct kind of person. And I don't think I have it right here. I could probably pull it up, but I never forget, like it was the last interview and I was asking him about, like smartness and things like that. And I remember asking, I was like, yeah, do you have to like get it right away? And he's like, nah, like to be smart, you don't have to get it right away. Like as long as you like keep trying and you eventually get it, like it doesn't, it doesn't matter. And so those were like small, like little snippets of where I was saying like, I think there's something here and I would love to like continue to further build it out and study it. Because I do think that context is very particular. And I think that's why I said that goes back to the point earlier where I think it's important to study students in different contexts because I think their enactment, because there's different norms in different contexts too. And so how smartness is defined in the, say, summer mathematics program versus 5th grade versus 4th grade is all different. And so students are bringing those and they're trying to make sense of them in each particular space. But I would say, I would say there's some subtle things in there in the data that I would say like, oh yeah, these are like shifts that I would love to continue to pick up on for sure. And to add to that, which is a different, even when I think about like the growth mindset and grit stuff, and some of the studies that I've been reading like recently, one of the things that they're finding too is the context matters. So it's not just like I have a growth mindset in general. It's like what tasks, like what activities, when do you have grit? Like it's not just like this necessarily like global thing. There's a lot of different layers, like levels to it. So you're thinking of it as like a latent, right, of like global grit or global growth mindset. There's other pieces of it too that I think is important. I think this is kind of getting at that very like smaller, granular size level.
So there are 2 questions, and there's also one in the chat. So I'm not sure which order you want to take the mic.
Let's see.
From Gordon Palmer.
Yes.
Somebody should read it.
Oh, should I read that out loud? Or do you want to read that? Can you read that?
Oh yeah, let me read it. So the question is, I'm just always proud to see you shine. Thank you, brother. I had to read that part. I guess I'm wondering if you can speak a bit to the theoretical implications of your work, particularly in conversation with CRT, and what does this mean for the field? Great question. As a backdrop, one of the things that I was thinking about, but I didn't think it necessarily fit here, was even using Black crit. And Black crit is newer, but I didn't see it necessarily fit in here, which is why I went back to CRT, just because of where it was, and I didn't see the fit. That being said, I think directly as it connects to CRT, at least a couple things, I guess, come up. Well, theoretically, what comes up to me goes back to I think the Carla paper, and thinking about this notion of heterogeneity amongst Black learners. I think this is like a particular example of really getting some of what they wanted in that paper in terms of providing more nuance to understand like Blackness and race and how that's intersecting with different things. In particular for this study, it's like mathematics. But I think theoretically that definitely offers some nuggets there. I also think, again, even going back to, I would say, like what I was talking about with growth mindset and grit, these are very contextual. The ways I'm thinking about smartness and connecting it are very specific. And so I think this could essentially lead to, thinking about, I guess, in what ways can smartness, like I said, when I set out to do it, it was really to be able to name very specific ways, as opposed to just saying like growth mindset this and, or grit that. And I think in here, we see some very specific cases of like what it means to do smartness, like the revising thinking, the listening and learning to others. Like even like something that's listening, like I didn't mention it here, but Jeremiah, to no surprise, he was a student that was like, essentially, listen. He's like, I listen, but like, I'm not listening to learn. I'm like, listen as like, I'm being respectful, I'm quiet. So I'm just sitting here, but I'm not really hearing what you have to say, which I wonder where he gets that from. You think about society, but just like those very small things, I think kind of comes into play too. Like, I think particularly with respect to CRT, I think the thing that kind of had me thinking really is the counter narratives in particular, because these students are definitely defining and describing smartness in ways that I think is pushing back against different narratives. And to be honest, just providing like, what are children saying about it? I think I haven't really read a lot of studies that kind of focused in and keyed in on smartness specifically. And this is an opportunity to do that. So I think there's something that could be said there. And I think go hand in hand with this idea of whiteness as property. That definitely is coming up, but you're seeing like, again, these alternative ways of thinking about smartness that the students are bringing to the table as Black learners. So I hope that answers your question, but those are different things that I'm thinking about, both theoretically and I think what it could mean for future work in the field.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. You had your hand up.
Actually, you kind of answered my question when you're answering Dan's questions. But...
Nice, 2 for 1, cool.
Randy, did you have a question too?
Yes.
But I'm having trouble formulating it because it's almost circular. It seems like it relates to Talia and Dan's. So you said earlier that brilliance is axiomatic, which I think is a powerful sentence. But that isn't necessarily how people feel or children feel, right? That's a stance that we can take. So I'm sitting here thinking about whether the students would respond differently to different terms or to different questions. Or like, I was thinking, what would I say if somebody asked me when I was a kid, smart or smart in math, and what does that mean? What does it not mean? Or even what does it mean to be asked that? Like, because if it's axiomatic that I'm brilliant, then I'm already smart. So, but you're sort of trying to get at what it means to be smart, and I'm just sort of sitting here trying to figure out what it's like for these kids to be sort of engaged in these conversations. Like, what do they think you're asking? What do they think this is about? What are they? Yeah. And this isn't a good question. It's because it's an unformulated.
No, that's exactly good. I mean, that goes back to the implications. I think. So it's weird because, again, and you said it perfectly, like that's the assumption that we have, but I can't say that's assumption that they have. And so in the moment, the language, it becomes challenging because we're getting at kids' epistemology. Like that's what we're doing. We're trying to figure out like how they're making sense of like knowledge and knowing, particularly as it relates to this concept of like smartness, which isn't like an easy task. I think to some degree, this shows that it can be done. I also think, to your question, and same wonders that I've had as I've done this work too, is there's a lot to unpack in trying to like nail the language down and figure out like what are the words, what are the approaches. Like I'd even think about, like you said, like how are they responding to me versus, let's say, like Dan, like if he were to ask those questions. Like, what does it mean like to even have rapport? Like, why was some kids like more open to being able to communicate certain things with me, and why like Jeremiah wasn't the case? So I think the language piece is important, but even thinking about as a researcher, like who's doing the work and what does it mean to have these kind of relationship with kids, to be able to extrapolate it, to get the data, but be able to extrapolate out what it means. Like just grappling through like the language even here was like challenging just to try to like figure out. And I was in the space and, constantly probing, as you saw, like in the interviews, and trying to make sense of it. It's definitely challenging. I think it's worth it. And we know kids can do it. I think it goes back to the implications of thinking about this from a methodological perspective of how can we, like, what are the different things that I think we need to have in place to try to have as much as we can an accurate representation of like what the students are saying and doing. And some of that to me would be like a longitudinal approach as well, where we're seeing them in like where I wouldn't just have like what they're saying, but I could also be observing in these different spaces, coming back to them. Or even if it was something like showing them video of things. Like I didn't show them video, but I could show a kid like a clip and say like, what's going on here in this moment? Like, what were you thinking here? Like just being more, I guess, out the box to really try to hone in and figure out like what the students are, how they're definitely making sense of like the questions that I'm asking them. Because it's not, I agree with you. They could interpret it, I think, a lot of different ways. But I think as I was with the rapport and with the questions and what I was trying to do and showing them work, I think I was heading like in the same direction. It wasn't like I was hitting a moving target per se. I was trying to kind of stay consistent. And I think that to some degree was useful in trying to be able to pull out the conceptions that I thought they had. James.
We should probably need a question.
I think this is quick.
Go ahead.
Mine being long, in which case, sorry. So one thing I noticed was that it may not necessarily have been like the primary focus of this research here, but it seemed like their conception of smartness itself actually was starting to change with certain questions people were asking. So I was wondering, I guess, was there like an overall general shift that you saw as you were going through this? If you were talking to these 5 students and say in the beginning they had this idea of what smartness was, by the end, was there some grand shift in how they're perceiving it, since that would kind of impact what we're actually extrapolating from them?
I think the perseverance / keep trying, work hard is something in particular that stuck out. And I didn't even say this, the mathematics, right? One of the things that I always try to do is try to keep the content of the mathematics important. In another paper, I just talked about the student exceptions here, But your question also made me think about like the mathematics that are in play that actually allows you to provide opportunities to think about the different construction of smartness. I know I just hit a lot. What I'm saying is, in those certain problems, yeah, perseverance and keep trying and working hard probably will come up because they're working on a problem for like 2 weeks. And so in that sense, I wasn't trying to be like CJ thing, but in that sense, I think the task helped provide an opportunity to be able to think about a shift in constructions of smartness. And so, yes, like in this particular thing, like I would say like the idea of working hard, persevering was something that I think probably came across in all of the students in various ways. Some more than others, and even taking up other things like revising my thinking, listening, learning from others. But I think another critical piece in that too is not just those conceptions, but again, we're talking about the context, but explicitly the mathematics that you're doing in that. Because for example, if they were just doing like rote stuff and I was asking questions, we wouldn't have a lot of fodder, right? But the fact that you're working on tasks that don't have a solution, or you're working on tasks that have 125 combinations, or you're working on tasks that have constraints, even the fraction task, I didn't put it here, but there was a fraction task that basically asked them, is 1/4 the same? Where you had a whole that was partitioned into 4 equal parts. The 1/8 was a blue triangle, and another 1/8 was a green rectangle. But they had to prove that they both mean the same thing. But that's not intuitive. I mean, I can count the pieces, but the triangle and the rectangle look different. And so that just automatically is going to afford you different opportunities to even conceive and have different constructions of smartness. So to answer your question, I think overall things like persevering, working hard, things like that, I think happen. But your point definitely makes me think about, and I wrote about that too, is the intersection with the mathematical work that you're working on. And that's where I think, that's why I think about the math and the kind, like it has to be both of those things like in play. And I think that's the direction that, I think the field is heading. That's the direction that I'm trying to head into for sure. Great question.
On that time, I know that we give brothers a round of applause. Those who are here and want to stick around, we'll eat lunch outside so we can take masks off. If you have to go, I know lots of us have things on the hour. So thank you all for coming.
Hey, Antonio, if you're still there, really quickly, I can answer your question. I can give you a little bit of context about the students really quickly in case anybody was wanting to know. So Jeremiah ended up going to alternative school. I saw him like a couple of years later. There was another student that I had. His name was Luis. Amazing. He actually went to the school that my wife taught at and hated math. And I didn't even present Luis' work. His stuff is, that's another study too. Helen, oh, not Helen, but Ariana went to the same school that my wife taught at. I think she was fine. Chandler was like an outlier in the sense of she wasn't from that same school district. So she's doing amazing. She was coming from one of the top schools in the state of Michigan. So she's good. And I haven't heard from, I don't know about Kasim. And that was my original goal though, in terms of I wanted to follow with the students. And even thinking about it, that's a project that me and my advisor was talking about, of trying to find all of those students, because we get it often enough, or she gets it and I kind of hear about it, where a student will like randomly hit her up and be like, I remember being in this program and I'm so thankful that I was in that program and it did X, Y, and Z. And so to your point, Antonio, I think there's something that we're in the process of trying to do and figure that out. But yeah, that's why too with the kids, like it's personal. Like I want to find them and I saw them just like, man, like that, it's frustrating to see them in this context be like successful and great. And then just a couple years later, you find out that they hate math. And it's like, man, you were like killing it. So yeah, great question, Antonio. Okay.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
I think it's back to